Taking a holiday in Dorset in the middle of winter may seem like a strange idea, but I had a plan, and it all revolved around museums. The first being the Dorchester Keep Museum, then Bovina Tank Museum, followed by the Signals Museum at Blandford Camp, and finally a trip to Salisbury Cathedral to see a copy of the Magna Carta. The first one we were going to visit would be the Keep Museum at Dorchester. Been here before, very good museum, very interesting collection. The Keep Military Museum is in what used to be the gatehouse of the Devonshire Regiment Barracks. It's at the top of the hill in Dorchester, with excellent car parking nearby, very reasonably priced. And when you get inside, again, reasonable entry price, you get a museum that is packed full of interesting artefacts, artwork, and lots of useful material. In fact, the museum has produced some booklets which help you when you're exploring the different floors with information on all of the artefacts inside the cabinets. Everything is very well displayed, very well labelled, and as I say, the booklets tell you about every cabinet, and it walks you through the history of the regiment and the yeomanry associated with this museum. There's some interesting dioramas and lots of interesting artefacts from different periods, including the First World War and later on the Second World War. As I say, everything is very well displayed and well lit. Each of the cabinets has plenty of display information in there, and some of the artefacts are very unusual indeed. I didn't take a photograph, but they actually have one of Hitler's desks, apparently. So one of their more unusual regiments, a spoil of war. But the rest of the stuff inside the museum is all stuff to do with the museum, including an incredible collection of medals and information on how they were awarded. After that, we went to the Bovina Tank Museum. Now, this is probably my favourite museum of all time. I've been here many times. First time as a child in 1977. But this time I wanted to go and see the new layout for the World War II hall. So it's largely the same vehicles that were there before, but laid out in the order of various battles and campaigns that took place during the Second World War, and it's a very effective way of telling the story. And surrounding it, there's lots more artefacts, things I haven't seen in there before, including displays of uniform and personal kit, but also individual stories, and some very unusual vehicles like this Bison mobile armoured car, effectively. There's the usual collection of fantastic vehicles from throughout the period, both British and foreign vehicles, in an excellent state of preservation. And of course they have a huge back collection of other vehicles that they can bring in when they do special displays. And this is the thing I've always enjoyed about the Tank Museum. It never rests on its laurels. Every time I've been, there's a new display, or they've taken an existing display and found a better way of displaying that information so that people can enjoy it. So it doesn't matter whether you've been there before, go back again, you'll find something new to see and a new and interesting way of viewing stuff. There was a lot of material in the museum this time round aimed specifically at younger audiences. There's interactive displays, there's things for people to pick up and look at, but also some amazing artefacts like the flag there from Tobruk. And of course the vehicles themselves are in an excellent state of preservation and just amazing to look at. You know, the full range of vehicles. But you can't fail to be impressed when you see vehicles like the Panzer II. It's so huge, it's so massive, but also when you look at it, so complex, these interleaved wheels. But also innovations like the Zimrit anti-mine pace that you can get right up close and see. And interesting, like this wire-guided bomb, the Goliath. But some of the vehicles are absolutely and truly massive, and you stand next to them and you feel dwarfed by them. But then you'll turn around and you'll find pictures and artefacts and from their massive library of documentation. So there's a huge amount of stuff here. And no matter what vehicle you want to see or what particular period of the war that you're interested in, there will be vehicles there for you to look at. And I noticed that they'd redone some of their display boards for the vehicles, and again, packed full of information about the type of vehicle, but also the specific vehicle that they have. And as I said, I then moved on and sort of retraced my steps and went through the First World War hall. Had to be done. Again, well worth going and looking at. This is a Mark 1 overtopping a trench, and then there's lots of display cabinets with very personal stories of the tank men, those first tank crews, and examples of different surviving World War One tanks. Some of these, as far as I understand it, some of them are still runners, but they don't run them obviously for the sake of preservation. This amazing diorama of Cambrai was very interesting to me as the modeller, because obviously they've used different scale models at different depths to create an extra sense of depth, but a really interesting model. I was looking at it and thinking, cool, I'd like to play on that. And as I say, they've got some fantastic vehicles in here. And when you go out into the main tank hall, you've got a range of vehicles showing the progression of vehicles, so from the earlier FT-17 tank through to First World War tanks. Now this particular tank, these were made of mild steel and were never intended for use in battle, but they ended up being used, and the battle damage on these vehicles is very evident. Again, interesting selection of vehicles. Many of these you can find in miniature for the games table, but to see them for real up front is very impressive, and of course you can get up close and personal with most of these. And again, the display material surrounding them is really excellent. Some interesting artifacts and small bits that tell the story of the men that had to fight these tanks. And then of course I see my old friend Tiger 131, seen this vehicle many times, a very interesting vehicle in its own right, particularly as this one, they've kept the damage that probably knocked out the tank. It didn't destroy the tank, but it probably scared the crew into leaving the vehicle because the turret was jammed and they were under shell fire. Lots of other German tanks that were captured and used for assessment purposes that have ended up in the collection, but of course also British vehicles that have managed to survive somehow and have ended up in this amazing world-class collection, and displayed so well with beautiful artwork and interesting pictures and lots of material to read and collect. And then of course at the end, a brilliant shop, probably the best shop in a museum I've ever seen, including a ton of modelling stuff. So a really good museum and well worth the visit. Now the third museum that we visited, and this is not something I often get to say, is one that I've not done before. This museum is actually inside an active military camp, so you have to go through the rather unusual process of signing in at the guardhouse, given a photographic ID by men armed with machine guns, but then you can go in and see the museum. And it's a very interesting collection, obviously aimed specifically at the signals regiments and all of the equipment and the innovations that have been developed within the army to get messages to and from the front line. And very interesting and unusual because I've not seen a lot of the artifacts in here before. So again, very interesting to get to a museum that I've not done before. And if you've got any interest in that side of military history, then are well worth looking out for this and visiting this museum. As with the other museums, again, interesting artifacts, well displayed with lots of information, well lit and well displayed, enough to keep you occupied for a good couple of hours if you're going to read a lot of the material. And there's even a cafe on site, so very, very interesting. And some of the equipment and the vehicles that they had on display I've not seen before, so that's always a treat for me. But I also had some really interesting dioramas and figures on display showing off uniforms and equipment to show the vehicles as if they were in use and so on. There's also some very interesting little models on display, such as this mobile pigeon loft from the First World War, but also displays dedicated to individuals, such as this one dedicated to the railwayman Eric Lomax, with information about the book that he wrote. But there's also some really good D-Day information available, including this excellent diorama of Corporal Thomas Waters, who won a medal for keeping communications open across Pegasus Bridge, along with a load of other information that was interesting and related to parachute regiments of interest to me. And then in other parts of the museum, they've got more modern equipment, including this Pink Panther reconnaissance vehicle, and snowcat vehicles for taking communications out into icy areas. And then at the end of the holiday, we managed to sneak in one final little trip. Not quite a museum, but a trip into Salisbury, because I wanted to go and see the copy of the Magna Carta that they had there. This is one I've not seen before. I've seen the Magna Carta in various other places, but the one that they've got at Salisbury Cathedral is particularly fine and well worth seeking out if you're in the area. And inside the church itself, or the cathedral rather, there's a lot of information about how the building was made, and it's just an incredible space. Whether you're religious or not, it's an amazing building to be in. It takes the breath away when you see the height of this building, and to know how it was built over the period of something like 38 years, I think it took to actually build. But as I mentioned, the copy of the Magna Carta that's kept here is particularly fine, with exceptionally fine, detailed handwriting. I mean, so perfect it looks like it's printed. Better version than any that I've seen before. And there's information as well about what's contained within the Magna Carta, including important parts that are still in law today. So there you are, a very quick roundup of what I did last week while away on holiday with the family, and proof, if proof were needed, that this old Grognard can turn any trip, no matter what time of year, into a miniature adventure.